Happy Feast of Corpus Christi. Thank you. Today we celebrate the true presence of Jesus Christ in the Eucharist, body, blood, soul, and divinity, in the appearance of bread and wine. And I think that we need to talk about what we believe. Especially I had one assignment where this was more prevalent than other assignments, but I'm sure that it's not exclusive here. There can be people who still struggle with belief in the true presence. Even faithful Catholics for many years can still struggle with, is Jesus truly present in the Eucharist? So I think we should talk about that today. Is Jesus Christ truly present in the Eucharist? One of the ways that I think ultimately can harm our Eucharistic belief is actually how we receive communion. My guess is that most of us were trained in second grade on how to go to confession, but also how to receive communion. But my guess is that over the last however many years of your life, you've heard at least a few homilies from a priest or deacon saying the goodness of confession and reminding you of to go, and maybe even giving like tips on how to do so. And so you've probably heard quite a bit on how to go to confession, but maybe not as much how to continue to receive communion well. So I think that we should talk about that. What are some best practices for reception of Holy Communion? So I want to show you some of the ways that I've found over the last 6 years that people receive communion that I think is unhelpful. And I'm praying that no one's upset at the end of Mass. Who can tell me the two different ways that one can receive communion? On the hands, what was the other one? On the tongue. Very good. Okay, let's talk about the more ancient way of receiving communion on your tongue. Notice that even the title for it is called On Your Tongue, not in your mouth. People come forward, the body of Christ. Amen. If I have to put my fingers in your mouth, that's disgusting. So put your tongue out. Second way that I see is I call it the bait and snap. They just barely put the tongue out there a little bit. And then as you get close, I could lose some fingers. This Mass thing is dangerous, okay? The next one is the wanderer. We're blessed to have communion rails, and a lot of people do kneel down, and it helps to cut this one out, but it does still happen. You come forward, and they're like, the body of Christ, they're like, Amen. And I'm like, the last one is the liquor. You know who you are. And it's nasty. You shouldn't have to move your head at all. Remember, you're receiving something, not taking something. So if you're... Stop. So we're going to practice together. Even if you don't regularly receive communion on your tongue, we're all going to practice together. So I want you to think of when you were a child and you had like the neighborhood bully, or your younger sibling like kicked you in the shin or something like that, okay? I want you to really work up a real... Okay? Go ahead, let's see it. You're facing me so I can see if you're not doing it. Let's see it, everyone, a real nasty one. Okay? Now, once your tongue is out, I want you just to open your mouth. Ready? It was that simple. That's all you got to do. And then just even close your eyes and just become like a rock. And we'll take care of the rest, okay? Second way that people largely receive communion is communion on their hands. We're, again, very blessed to have a communion rail at our parish that it's been preserved over the years. But just it's pretty solid, okay? It's not going anywhere. If you're not standing close enough, it's really difficult for me to give you communion. This happens more often with kids, but it can happen with adults too. We're totally safe, okay? I'm not going to strike you, I promise. You can come all the way forward to receive communion. Okay, if you look at your kid and they're standing like 4 feet back, very little I can do. And I'm not going to jump over the communion rail to make sure someone gets communion, okay? The next one is, hey, can I use your watch can you just take that off? Just put it right in my hand. Just place it in there. Just go ahead, just place it right in my hand. Right, I can't place something in your hand if your hand's on a slant. So people will come forward, right, and they're like, the body of Christ, they're like, amen. Not a lot I can do with that. Make sure your hands are totally flat. The last one, I saw this way more in Champaign than I see here, but it was certainly the case, and it caught my attention. I think it's kind of a funnier one. They'll come forward and they receive Jesus. So, right, we believe that Jesus Christ is truly present in every host. Every Eucharist is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of God. Okay, so I get to hold Jesus in my hands, possibly. But there was, again, largely in Champaign, they would like walk off to the side, and it was out of piety, honestly. And they would look up at the cross and kind of stare and maybe say a prayer or something like that. So I'm literally holding God in my hand, and I'm looking up at an image of what we think God might look like while I'm holding God. It doesn't make any sense. It'd be similar to, right, the most intimate thing we could do with God is receive Him in Holy Communion. That's the most intimate thing we get to do with God. It's similar to a marriage couple on the night of their marriage, them finally getting back to the room and getting ready to enjoy the marriage act, and they're talking to each other from the other rooms, and he's like, okay, honey, we're ready. She's like, okay, I'll be out in a second. And he says, make sure you bring a picture of yourself. She'd be like, dear, I'm going to just stand in front of you. Like, you won't need that. No, just trust me. Right? It would be weird. And you need counseling. So don't do that. Now, the last two I want to talk about are slightly more serious. In fact, they're very much more serious. It happens, unfortunately, every so often where a host falls on the ground, or even worse, you're like cleaning up after Mass and you find a host like in the pew or in a missal or something like that. It's very unfortunate when that happens. If I'm in the habit of receiving communion and then walking off without receiving, I'm actually helping that to keep happening. Because the more that happens, the more it signals to other people who may not believe, it's fine to just walk off with a host. So if you have the habit of receiving communion and walking back to your pew or just walking far off, please stop. Right? It's totally safe. We'll have masks on. You can even if you want to take a step off to the side, fine. Pull your mask down, receive communion. There's no need to be walking off. At my first assignment, we had several football players that would go to Mass. They would come as a team. And I told them one time during Mass that if they see anyone walk off with a host, even if it's a little old lady, that they had my permission to tackle them. So don't tempt the football players. The last one is, right, we get to receive God, right? It's the most powerful and intimate thing we get to do. If we're in the habit of then immediately leaving Mass, or at least leaving Mass before it's over, one, I'm committing a sin, but also I'm revealing to other people something. Right? A lack of belief that I have, or a disrespect that I have, a lack of knowledge that I might have. Right? How I receive communion, and actually reveal something. Right? Our bodies can reveal things that are going on. Right? Ladies, when you give your husband or kids the look, right, it's revealing something with your body. Right? And they're supposed to know what that means. Right? So how I receive communion actually, it's a way of preaching to others. So am I receiving communion in the most reverent way? Right, so how I receive communion can largely reveal what I believe. So what do I believe, and should I believe? Right, we heard in the gospel today that the Last Supper, Jesus takes bread, he says a blessing, he breaks it, and he gives it to the apostles. He says, this is my flesh and blood. We heard a couple of different times throughout the Easter season of this at the very end of Luke's gospel, these two disciples who are walking away from Jerusalem after the crucifixion and right as the resurrection is happening. And they come to encounter Jesus, but they don't recognize him because he's in his glorified form. And they stop for dinner, and he takes the bread, he says a blessing, he breaks it, and he gives it to them. And it's at that fourfold action, take, bless, break, and give, they recognize who it is. And they then run back to Jerusalem. to say that we knew who this was from the actions that he did. Why is it that those two disciples, why that fourfold action would have stood out to them? Where else would they have seen Jesus take bread, say a blessing, break it, and give it to people? Say it louder. Okay, you're all wrong. These were not apostles. They were just disciples. So they were not at the Last Supper. By the way, I totally baited you for that, just so you know. They were at the feeding of the 5,000 in John chapter 6, where Jesus takes a few loaves and some fishes, he breaks them, he blesses and breaks it, and gives and feeds 5,000 people. And then he goes on to give the bread of life discourse, where he says, if you wish to have any life within you, you must eat my flesh and you must drink my blood. And maybe a lot of the people kind of struggle with that, and they're like, we don't know, Jesus. Like, is that really what you mean? He's like, I'm sorry that you didn't understand. What I meant to say was, you must eat my flesh and you must drink my blood to have life within you. And they're like, hey, man, this is getting kind of weird and tough for us to believe. He said, and he triples down. If you wish to have any life within you, you must eat my flesh and you must drink my blood. Right? We hear in the first two readings today of this blood. It's just dripping with blood through the first two readings. Right? In the Old Testament, blood was seen as the life source. Right? Jesus wants to give us the life source, his life source, divinity. And we must consume that for it to happen. So, right, how I receive communion reveals what I believe, but should I believe? Jesus tells us to. And when people struggle with it, he has 7 times where he gives I am statements. Right, I am the vine and you are the branches. And there's other ones. One of them is I am the bread of life. At 6 of those 7, people do not leave. People do not get upset with what he's saying. When he says, I am the vine and you are the branches, no one gets upset. Right? Because they understand what he's saying. But when he says, I am the bread of life, they get angry and they leave. So he's saying it very literally, and that's where they're struggling with it. Jesus tells us to believe that he's truly present in the Eucharist. I don't know about you, I'm kind of a big fan of listening to Jesus. So how I receive communion reveals what I believe. Should I believe? I think so. I think we should take Jesus' word for it. That Jesus is truly present in the Eucharist. Now, the next question is, can I believe? Can I intellectually assent that Jesus is truly present in the Eucharist? Does it make any sense? Am I a crazy person to think that Jesus is present in the Eucharist? I think so. Hold on, let me grab something. Can anyone tell me what this is? Hold on, before you say it, let me make sure everyone can see it so everyone has a fair way of looking at it. Can everyone see that? What is this? Are you sure? Does anyone need to touch it or smell it or taste it or anything like that? Okay, good. I was really hoping that wouldn't be the case. So, right, this chair is made out of mostly metal, or a cheap metal at least, and it's got this kind of cushion here. It's got another cushion there. So it's got some cloth to it a little bit. It's got some screws, but it's mostly metal. So that just must mean that that's what all chairs look like. Right, I understand this one chair, so that must mean that every single chair has to look like this. But I know of chairs that don't necessarily have a back on it. I know chairs that aren't necessarily made of metal. I know chairs that don't have 4 legs. Right, so I can put this chair next to this chair, and they actually don't really look a ton alike. Right, this one's mostly wood with a lot more cushion on it. It's bigger, it's nicer, more expensive, it's heavier. So what it looks like and tastes like and smells like and acts like isn't always the same. And that's actually how a lot of things work in our life. When you get in your car to go home, I doubt you're going to say, I'm going to go get, and then you list all the things that the car is made out of. Because it would take forever. You just say the car, and everyone kind of, oh, okay. Right, it happens quite a bit. Right, that something is something, right, the overarching thing of it, those are both chairs, the overarching thing of it, but the stuff it's made out of isn't the same and doesn't totally match what it is. Right? Neither of these two materials is the essence of chair. If I were to take a chainsaw, I actually talked to the deacon about doing this, but he was like, no, let's not, let's wait till next year. I was like, all right, fine. Taking a chainsaw and cutting it down the center, would chairness ooze out of it? No. But I'd know what these things are. They're chairs. So the overarching substance of the thing is chair, and all the accidental qualities are those accidental qualities, but they could also be other accidental qualities. Right, so how I interact with the Eucharist to believe that Jesus is truly present and what looks like bread, tastes like bread, acts like bread, is the same way that I actually interact with everything. So can I intellectually assent that Jesus is truly present in the Eucharist? I think so. I think it actually makes a lot more sense to believe that. Last week when we celebrated Trinity Sunday, I don't know about you, but the Trinity is very complicated in my mind. It's not as easy to understand as a lot of other parts of the faith. For the first 300 years of the church, they actually spilled quite a bit of ink writing about that, and actually there was quite a bit of arguments that went on. So I don't know if you know of St. Nicholas. Yeah, the big jolly guy who brings presents every year. St. Nicholas was at those meetings, and he actually punched another bishop in the face because the other bishop was saying something wrong about Jesus' nature. Nobody has punched anyone in the face over the Eucharist, except for maybe some of those football players. Right? So everyone immediately ascended to, this is what we believe. Jesus is truly present in the Eucharist. Today we have the feast day of Corpus Christi. In the year 1263, a priest was on his way to Rome because he was struggling in his own priesthood, his own belief. And he stopped at a small Italian town to say Mass, and as he elevated the host, he doubted that Jesus was truly present in the Eucharist. And the host flopped over and began to bleed. So I eat sandwiches pretty regularly. I also eat French toast almost every single day. It's never happened to me that as I was eating it that I had any doubt and then all of a sudden the French toast turned into flesh. It's never happened to me. Right? This priest was saying Mass, and what we believe to be Jesus' true presence became flesh and blood. Right? The accidents of the thing and the substance of the thing became one. And he ran to Rome to show Pope Urban VII, and the following year, because of a Eucharistic miracle, they began to have Eucharistic processions through the streets of Rome, and that's become a large tradition in our church because of a Eucharistic miracle. I hope that you go home today and actually Google Eucharistic miracles, because you'll find hundreds of stories of them. One is recent that I at least know of. I think it was 2016 at a Polish church, Christmas Eve. And it oftentimes actually goes back to when the priest doubts. I actually kind of take a little bit of pride that this has never happened to me. I must have enough faith that God doesn't need to do that. Thank you, Jesus. Right, so at every Mass there's this thing called transubstantiation. Maybe you heard of that as a child or recently, I don't know. Right, trans, which means change, and substantiation means the substance of the thing. So in a few minutes, I was surprised by this last night. All of a sudden, people are just standing up here with stuff. But I'll be ready this time, I promise. People will bring up this chalice and this cruet that has bread and wine. It's just ordinary bread and wine. And I'll come get it, and we'll go up there, and I'll have certain intentions, and I'll say certain words. I'll say God's words. It'll sound like my voice. It'll smell like my breath. But it'll be God's words, and a miracle will happen right before us. The substance of it will change. It will cease to be ordinary bread and wine, and it will be the flesh and blood of God. So at every Mass, it's necessary for two things to change: bread and wine. But the hope is actually that three things change. Right? A miracle is going to happen right before us. If I were to go out and see someone fly, it would be a miracle. And that would probably change how I view the world. If I were to see someone die right in front of me, and they were to all of a sudden an hour later come back to life, that would have a deep impact on my life. That would be a miracle. And every Mass, a miracle happens right before us. Something ceases to be something and becomes something otherworldly. And we leave exactly the same as we showed up. At every Mass, bread and wine is meant to change, and you and I. A miracle is going to happen on this altar in a few minutes. Am I going to leave Mass different than the way I showed up? I heard a phrase, a quote several years ago. I don't actually know who the author is. The quote was, "If I truly understood what was going on at Mass, if I truly understood the miracle that's going on at every Mass, I would crawl on my hands and knees over broken glass for miles just for a glimpse." And every Mass, you and I get to be present at a miracle. and my life's meant to be forever changed. Are you ready for that change today and the next Mass you go to and every Mass from there on? A miracle is about to happen. And then God wants that to totally affect your life and you to become a miracle in the world.